Welcome, I'm John Welty, and welcome to Shop Talks with Mestek Machinery. I'm here with David Daw and Mike Bailey, guys with a lot of experience in the industry, and we're going to be talking about prefabrication today. So I've been out on some installs that I've noticed something going on where, after they're producing the rectangular duct through a duct line, I'm seeing them put the duct together, bolt it all together, flange it together, blue plastic on the ends, but they're doing like 50-foot sections, and then they load it right on semi-trailers backed right up to the building. And my first thought, I don't have a lot of experience with what they're doing with that, was that's going to be a lot of handling, right? And so I was kind of curious about what's going on with that. What do you guys see happening with that type of stuff?
Yeah, I first noticed the trend, I'll call it, the prefabrication in California about 6 or 7 years ago. And like you, I saw this and like, what is going on here? Because there was not only duct being sectioned together, there was conicals and taps and collars that were installed and they were sealed. And I'm just kind of watching this process going, well, that's supposed to be happening in the field.
Yeah.
But then as I started asking around and traveling around the country and started seeing more and more of it, it's become the hot buzzword in the industry is prefabrication. I can only lend some of the contractors' views of that as why it's become standard, really. They've always done it the wet side, what I've been told. It's just now started to really take effect on the dry side, which would be our side. But it is more handling, but there's less inventory to keep up with in the field because you section them all together, so it's one piece versus multiples. You also talk to some contractors, they feel like that their shop labor is more tenured in the shop than the field because the field labor tends to move around a little bit more. But it's just a better deliverable and a controlled atmosphere. I think that's the big part that I've kind of taken to be the real main reason that prefabrication has become a very real trend when it comes to the dry side of the business.
Well, if you think about this, if you're shipping each piece ductwork, whether it's a 5-foot section or fittings, up until recently, those were all individually either sometimes put in cardboard boxes or thrown onto a truck. So my experience and what I've been told as a rule of thumb is that field labor was 3 times shop labor. So if you're paying $1 an hour in the shop, it's costing you $3 in the field, give or take here. So when you've got this material deduction work onto the job site, there's a whole logistics involved. Usually they get early in the morning, 5:30, 6, so they can get them on the job site before even the rest of the crews come in. And then you've got an inventory situation where you have all these parts that come off the truck or in a box, however they're on. They try to get them floor by floor, say in a high rise or in a zone in a building. But if all these pieces are separate, running around trying to find the elbow that goes with the straight joint, etc., a lot of labor. Yeah. So the more you can assemble in your plant under controlled environment, the much less there is of trying to find these pieces and assemble them. It's so much faster to put a joint in, particularly in cold weather. Mm-hmm. If you're trying to assemble ductwork on a day like today here in Akron, it's cold and windy, and you're on an exposed building. So if you get a third of that ductwork done in the shop, it just eliminates how much field connection time.
So that becomes just a member of the building that's being put in with a crane then at that point.
Exactly
that's
right.
How it's working?
Yeah, if you see them on the job site where they used to haul cages up with loose pieces, now they got a couple of cables on 50-foot sections, just lifting it right up into place.
Like a beam.
Yeah.
Riser duct's a big one. That's usually riser duct can be 16-gauge black welded duct. And I had a contractor tell me that he started to section his welded duct together, 40-foot sections with lifting lugs because he could get the crane out at 7:30 in the morning. He could take a 40-foot riser duct and get it inside the riser with one labor, not 4 or 5. So he was not only saving time because he could do that within a half a day where it took him all day with 4 guys in the chase. So it was not only a time saver, but it was also a safety factor as well.
So then you brought out a better product so that they're being in that controlled environment of the factory. They can control the floor being flat, being level, the space that they're assembling it being so that they can control how the fittings are bolted together, how well they're sealed.
Yeah.
You can probably do sealage checks right there in the factory.
Mhm. They are doing that. They're testing ducts before they go.
Okay.
To fail a leakage test in the field is quite expensive.
Okay.
So that also
Because
lends
you have
to-
all that logistics, and then you got to do it over again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that leads to the prefabrication side as well. Now, if you look back at it, some contractors would tell you that we're taking 40% of the labor out of the field.
Really?
40% up
Wow.
to, and you're saving material by ordering material in volume as well. So there's so many tentacles to prefabrication, and all of them make sense to me. Now that culture starts at the top. It's not accepted by all. There's been several companies that the project managers fought it, or the general contractor said you can't do it.
Right.
But those two processes got vetted out per se, and the project manager starts to see the value of it, and then away we go. Right. So I don't think it's as far as you look at the major metropolitans and major cities, I don't think it's caught on in every city to the magnitude it has in some. I'll tell you this: Atlanta's just starting to do it, and the first job's being done right now at Children's Hospital. And the general contractor did say, "You can't do it. There's no way," and they did it. So that'll probably be a trend
now.
now.
The reasons why a GC would not want
Style of ductwork buildings. You know, you look in New York, you don't have a lot of land, right? New York straight up. Atlanta, you got a little bit more land. So every job's got its own persona, right? So it just depends on the building.
Well, I suppose those general contractors have their own culture and way of doing things too, so it
Mhm.
requires a change for them.
Mm-hmm.
So I imagine we've talked before about how changes in technology have happened. There must be quite a bit of tooling around these general contractors and the engineers and the installers working together, because there has to be a lot of collaboration of the right information to the right place at the right time in order to prefabricate. Because I assume while you're installing, there's things that perhaps didn't line up quite the way somebody expected, and changes have to be made. And the more you prefabricate, the more you have to control those variables, right?
Yeah, I think what you're speaking on there is the BIM model.
Okay.
Right, collaboration. As far as trades not colliding right together. So now within the Revit style of software, shop detail drawings, that the piping guys can be drawing at the same time as the duct guys and the electrical guys, so you don't have that collision. And collision checking is a big deal when it comes to prefab, because if the drawings aren't right and the buildings aren't correct, then the prefab's not going to fit. So software's been a huge part of
Mike,
it.
when
Yeah.
you talk about BIM, it's building information management
Modeling.
building information modeling.
Yeah, and that is a big deal, and I think that's afforded the contractors to be able to even try this prefab.
Yeah, so that's basically some kind of a common protocol for them to be able to model things together and then assemble their drawings together from different sources, I believe.
Correct.
Yeah.
And they'll take those drawings into the shop now versus taking those drawings into the field and trying to put these ducts together and the spin ends or the air tights or the conicals or the could be fire dampers, whatever it is. Let's take welded duct. They have to test that welded duct with that red ink or red dye, and they're doing that in the shops now before it hits the job site. And the other part about that with prefab is the fast pace today. These contractors are awarded the job on Friday, and the roof is already on the building Monday, right? So it's a matter of just-in-time inventory a little bit too, but the fast pace in which these jobs are being asked as far as schedules lends itself to some of the prefab and trying to lessen that human element in the field and reduce that labor in the field from a time aspect.
Well, I know from being out on installs of just of duct lines that having to fix something in the field at a customer's factory, from our perspective, would be 10 times faster to fix it back in the factory before it ships.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the things that we find value taking back to engineering.
Mm-hmm.
So I can see how that same type of system applies itself to prefabrication of duct in the field.
Yeah.
For the people that are using those Fabriduct lines, because that in the factory you've got the cranes, you've got everything that you need to solve the problem. You got all the people that are there, the engineers are there, whatever you need is there. In the field you don't have all of that, so you don't want to have to be doing all that in the field, and you don't want the people in the field having to make all those decisions, and then be able to come back and update the information. So that makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
One small part when you think about the growth of the 4-bolt connector system, the flange duct, whether it's slide on or rolled on. Every piece of ductwork today puts a gasket between the flanges, and most of it's butyl gasket today. Well, again, I go back out to 30-degree day, that butyl gasket is really not pliable. So just getting it on, the metal's cold, etc., and trying to get it positioned properly. So, and that's critical for leakage. A lot easier to do that in the shop.
Well,
Much
doing it in
easier
the
to
cold
do.
probably is a negative effect on that leakage.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
so doing it in the shop is much more controlled, easier to get on the duct properly. So
There's a lot
Yeah.
to think about.
I think we did a podcast not too far ago talking about the evolution of the industry, and I think this leads right into it. As to how the job sites are run today, and how this prefab is being more widely accepted by not just the contractors, but general contractors and building owners too. So I think that's it's important to talk about. And I think today, if you went around the country and you talked to contractors, what's your goal? What are you trying to achieve today? Well, first they're going to tell us we're trying to achieve more production with less human input, right? The labor pool isn't what it used to be. But we're also trying to build more products within our shop, test more products within our shop, so we can make a better deliverable for the field. So then my man hours in the field, installation hours are less, but we're still doing sizable jobs. I've seen contractors go from 50 million to 100 million, but they haven't added any labor because of the technology.
Mike, do you see general contractors or even building owners that are in the know on how much savings there are in manifolding or pre-assemble would actually write that into the contractor, that the sheet metal contractor would have to manifold or prefab?
I don't know a firm answer to that, but I will say most contractors are bidding the jobs as if they were still going to install in the field.
Yeah.
So the contractors themselves, they have a little leg room there to
Pick up some money.
pick up some if things go right, of course.
So this might be a topic for another talk, but where do we see? How do we see people keeping up with all the technology changes, with training their workforce and keeping people up to date on just the changes that are taking place, to how things are being installed, what things need to be paid attention to, how weather affects gaskets and fittings and that sort of stuff. How do you see people addressing that these days? Do you get into that much?
As far as the products themselves, you mean?
Or
Just in the industry.
Or
in general.
training in
Yeah.
general?
There is a big push.
Well, SMAC
Is that-
does training in combination with the SMWIA. The schools around are probably the only place today that you can get that kind of training.
Yeah, there's a really big push to try to figure out how we're going to get the younger generation into our industry.
Okay.
So much so we did through SMAC and two contractors on the West Coast did heavy metal camps.
Okay.
Which were widely acceptable.
I remember seeing something about that.
Yeah, in Seattle and in San Francisco.
Okay.
It was pretty neat to see how these young kids, and we're talking about middle school up through 17-year-old kids, who weren't going to college. They just weren't college. It wasn't their thing. It's not for everybody.
Right.
And they found a trade that they didn't know about. And they went to these camps, and I think they had somewhere between 16 and 20, and they were able to obtain 3 or 4. But it was really heartwarming to see the parents talk about this, that their children or their kids were probably not going to go to college. One, maybe they couldn't afford it, or two, they just weren't college type, cut out to be college type kids.
Yeah.
And they found this trade through these camps, and now they have a job and they have a career to look forward to. So that's been a big discussion point for a long time now, is how do we get the younger generation into the trade? And from my perspective, it's software.
Yeah.
And I think you got to start somewhere in that middle school era, because most of the kids today, and I say kids, younger generation, don't know how much software drives this business.
Right.
And it absolutely drives this business. So
Yeah.
that's a key point.
This is amazing. More kids, I could say kids.
Young generation.
Young generation. If they knew the kind of dollars per hour that they could make in this trade, I think they'd be knocking doors down, because there's no other. I don't think there's any other building trade. There isn't any building trade that has the highest per hour content than HVAC. And there's money. If a kid doesn't want to go to college, he can make a damn good living.
And we're going to do the heavy metal thing, 'cause we did it. It's been accomplished in Seattle. It's been accomplished in San Francisco, and it was widely acceptable and successful. So The next one is going to be in Atlanta, where I
Okay.
live, and I'm going to be working with a local contractor to do that. So we're meeting next week to start to frame that
Okay,
up,
good.
right? And,
So that's a program that's expanding.
Mhm.
Well, that's good to see.
And then we talked about, or Dave talked about the JAT centers, getting out there through the SMAC community to find out where these training centers are. And for a company like us to try to work hand in hand with these JATC centers to train the younger generation is a big deal too. There's a lot of them out there.
Well, we'll have to make sure that we have information available below to follow up on that training center program.
Sure. Yeah, we will.
All right, great. Well, I think that's quite a bit to talk about with the prefabrication. Wraps that up for today. So thank you, Mike.
Yeah.
Thank you, David.
Thank
and
you.
thank you for listening.